like to start off by thanking all of y'all for being here. This church has just been a really welcoming family to me. They've been so helpful. They're continuing to be helpful to me now. And so I hope and pray that I'll be helpful to y'all in turn during my time here. If you would, please turn with me to 1 John chapter 2, verses 15 through 17. I'll give y'all a minute to get there. So, in these verses, it says, "Do not love the world, nor the things in this world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, and the lust of the eyes, and the boastful pride of life, is not from the Father, but is from the world. The world is passing away, and also its lusts, but the one who does the will of God lives forever." So I'd like to continue starting off by giving a quick background on this epistle. This is one of John's epistles to apparently an unnamed church, but he's writing about some different theological issues. Previously, he's touched on how God is light, how Jesus is light, the difference between light and darkness. He's also talked about how Christ is our advocate, how we can turn to Christ when we sin and be forgiven. Now he's moving on to this passage. He's talking about not loving the world, the difference between the love of the world, the love of the Father. And his command is, do not love the world, nor the things in the world. And he gives us several reasons why this is the case, why he wants us to do these things. The first of these, he says, if anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. The love of the world is incompatible with the love of God, with the love of the Father. John was a man who enjoyed using contrast in his writings. He frequently brought up light and darkness. He did this several times in his gospel. He's done it in this epistle. And he uses it to show just how different this world, the evil things in this world, can be from God, the things of God, the good things that he's given us, and things of that nature. I'd also like to introduce my own example in here and draw a comparison between oil and water. Not necessarily that one is better than the other, but that these two can't really mix together. Light and darkness are so different, they don't mix together, so neither can oil and water. And this is the difference between, God and the evil things of the world. St. Augustine, an early Christian theologian, also touched on this in one of his books called The City of God. In this book, he has, a city of God, where there's faith, there's righteousness, there's holiness. But there's also this thing called the city of man, a city of worldliness, a city without faith. And he frequently draws comparisons and contrasts between the two in his writings. And to use one last illustration here, I'm going to make a reference to a sermon I preached a while back where I was talking about a time in the gospel where Jesus was teaching, and he said you cannot serve, God and mammon, God and wealth. No man can serve two masters. If we wind up serving one, we'll end up hating the other. So all these illustrations point back to the idea that we have God, the good and righteous Father, who loves us, who desires for us to love him. And we have the world, a world of hurt, a world of brokenness, a world with all kinds of unrighteousness that is just contrary to what God desires for us. And we can either love one or the other. And this brings me to my next point, that there are things in the world that can lead us away from God if we let them. If we love these things, they'll gradually pull us away. I'd like to ask you a question, or I'd like for you to ask yourselves a question. Have you ever set out to do something that you knew was important, that you knew had to be done, and then gotten sidetracked? I pretty much, most of this semester, I just have hundreds of examples of times where something was due, and my friends came along, they asked me if I wanted food, if I wanted to go play video games. I was reading a book, I think it was just last week, and my friend David walks in and says, "Hey Jameson, you want to go play Smash Brothers?" Which it's a game where you pick two characters and you fight it out or whatever. And it's a whole bunch of fun. But there were a lot more productive things I could have been doing that day instead of playing Smash Brothers. Had a good time though, built up fellowship with him and everything. Anyway, we can easily become distracted from just about any major task in our lives, especially if it's something that we're not really enthusiastic about doing. And this can include the most important thing in our lives that we have to do with all. That's loving God. When Jesus was talking about the commandments, he said, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself." On this hangs all the law and the prophets. And I'm not saying, that there are things in our lives that are more enjoyable per se than loving God. There are just things that might be easier to do, that might be more fun at times to do. It's that whole instant gratification thing where you can go out and have a lot of fun but not get anything done at all, versus actually doing something meaningful, especially something for the kingdom. And this can apply to loving God. We can get drawn away from Him. And John introduces three things that can do that. He says, the lust of the flesh, that's our own desires, our own inner part that is attracted to sin. We're so easily tempted because so many times the thing that we're tempted by is a thing we want. It's a thing we want to have. It's something we want to do. And we know it's not right, but we want to do it anyway. And we'll come up with just about any excuse to do it. And that can pull us away from what God wants from us, from the life that He's called us to live. It can pull us away from our love for Him. John also mentions the lust of the flesh. Lust of the eyes. So those are the things that we see, the things that we look at that we're attracted to. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, looking at a person and lusting for them. It can be looking at something that you'd like to steal, something that, all sorts of things that we see that tempt us. For me, I found that this could even be the case when I'm looking at a video game that I really want to buy, when I know I should be spending, that money would be better spent elsewhere. Or wanting to play it when I know I should be doing other things, as I mentioned earlier. And he also mentions the boastful pride of life. This desire to be self-sufficient, or to take pride in our own efforts, in our own strength. Being able to do things without God. All these things, he says, are not from the Father. They can pull us away from the Father. They're of the world. And when I was doing some research for this sermon, I was reading through a commentary. And you can tell it's fancy just by the name. It's the Commentary Critical and Explanatory on the Whole Bible. It's a pretty long title. But the authors in this commentary make a reference to the Garden of Eden. They make a connection between how Eve was tempted and the things that John is warning us to avoid. When he says the lust of the flesh, the desires of the flesh, they note that Eve looked at the fruit and saw that it was good for food. It appealed to her, just to her base hunger, first of all. They said she also saw that it was good, pleasing to look at. it was nice to look at. That also made her desire it. And she had in mind that the serpent had told her it would make her wise. This type of pride where the serpent said you could be like God. And that seemed attractive to her, and so she sinned. If we focus on all these things, we'll miss out on what God has to offer because we're so busy looking at these other things, turning to these things and away from Him. The third reason that John gives for not loving the world and loving the Father instead, turning to Him, is that this world is passing away. There's going to be a time when the world as we know it comes to an end. It's talked about in several books of the Bible. Revelation, Jesus prophesies it and talks about it. And this can seem pretty scary. There's a whole bunch of end times things out there that people get interested in because they want to know what's coming. They want to know what to expect. And while we can look forward to this coming because it means that Jesus arrives and all things will be restored, renewed. There's a lot of things I think that we enjoy now that will be a little bit different. We'll be living perfect, holy lives. A lot of the things that we enjoy here that may not be the best for us, we'll have to give up. That can certainly be scary. But despite all this, Jesus' coming is a good thing. All the pain in the world, all the brokenness, all the hurt, it will all be done away with. We'll go to be with Him and we'll, be that way forever. If we love the world and we're attracted to the things of the world, we can wind up passing away with, this world. Not necessarily in the same sense that this world is passing away, but those who don't love God risk being cut off from Him forever. And that's a scary thing especially for believers, but also for just all people who need God in their lives, who need His healing, who need His guidance. And it's a terrible fate to experience. One of it's a pretty famous thing done in movies, is where you'll have this main character, and they're holding on to something that's about to be destroyed or is about to fall off a cliff or something. And if they just let go, they wouldn't fall with it. They wouldn't face danger or destruction. But they just can't let it go. Or they do finally wind up letting go and they're saved and there's a happy ending to the movie. But that's not always the case. And that's sometimes how I like to picture this whole the world is passing away thing. If we hold on to the things of the world, if we only seek the things of the world, we won't experience what John describes. Well, in this epistle, he says, the one who does the will of God lives forever. The one who loves God doesn't just have nice emotions for God. It's also tied to obedience. And these things are what result in salvation. So what can we do, knowing these things, knowing that we should not be loving the world, that we should be loving the things of God, that we should be loving God? Somehow, we have to find a balance where we can witness to and love those in the world, while also keeping our eyes heavenward, keeping our eyes on God. There's a very popular saying in the church where they say, be in the world, but not of the world. And that's what just this passage brings to mind. We have to be in the world, we have to work, we have to go about our daily lives, but we also have to be part of the work of the kingdom, of the restoration, of the bringing people into the church. When Christ ascended, He sent us out into the world. He sent the disciples out into the world to witness to others, to tell other people about Him, to bring them into the church, and we have to be about that same business. We don't get truly taken out of the world until either we die or Christ returns. So in the meantime, we have to be about making disciples, praying daily, relying on the Spirit. And He has promised, God has promised that He will be with us. He sent His Spirit to be in us. And that He'll continue to give us guidance and bless us. And so hopefully that in doing all these things that we'll be participants in the work of the kingdom.